Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Brad Feeks. I'm with the Estes Group, and Estes Group is very excited to have you today to this webinar. I'm going to allow just a couple minutes here as people join. As you know, our webinar today is on the subject matter of kinetic uplifts. Very excited to get into this with our team today, and talk through some of the technical challenges that come with a web uplift in the kinetic UI. This is a exciting area within the software right now. We've had a lot of fun over the past year getting ramped up to that and learning about its ins and outs. So as we jump in now, it looks like we have some folks in the room. Some folks here, even have some folks who are, looks like from all over, some old faces and some new ones as well. So very excited to have you along. We'll have the chat available for questions and answers. So if you have any questions you want to raise along the way, please, by all means, do that. And we can hit those as they come along. We'll have some time blocked at the end of the session to do some Q&A as well. And if we run out of that, we'll probably have ourselves a follow-up session where we do a little bit more of a panel discussion that is a little more open-ended and allows us to dive deeper into many of these topics. And talking with Joe and Matt, the consensus was that we could spend a lot of time going through all of these items and dig deep. So we look forward to doing with you in this session and in sessions to come. So that said, let's talk a little bit about let's first do a quick shameless plug about the Estes Group. If you don't know us, we're all about ERP-centric managed IT services, trying to combine the technical and the functional as it relates to ERP. That goes into private cloud hosting. We do some of that. We also do a fair bit of consulting services. We've been around for more than 20 years, and a lot of our work has been in the kinetic space of implementations, data migrations, optimizing, fine-tuning. And as you might know, we also do kinetic uplifts. So please, by all means, following up on this session, reach out to us if you'd like a complimentary 1-hour training session. We've been giving this to some of our existing customers and had a lot of fun doing that. So by all means, reach out and let us know you're interested. We'll talk further. So first thing, let's talk a little bit about setting the baseline here. Why are we here? And this is because we have a ticking clock, right? As I'm sure you're aware, the sunsetting of Epicor's smart client, or what we sometimes call the classic forms, is coming up. Version 2026.1, released in May of 26, will be the first where the classic forms, the classic screens are not supported anymore, right? So you'll only be working through the browser when you are interacting with the ERP system. So that's even different from what we have right now. You know that right now with the fat client, smart client architecture, you have a version that can be fully kinetic, but still a local install. That entire install is going away. And so that's going to be a very vastly different world for a lot of us, especially us folks who've been in the software for a long time. In the interim, what does that mean? It means reduced support for the classic, less functionality coming out. So you're in a situation as a customer where you're incentivized naturally to try and get yourself into the new world. And what does that mean? What are the pieces of doing that? We're going to talk about that. We're going to focus today a lot on the technical elements of that. So for all you propeller heads out there, this will be a fun session with you. I got two of my smartest people I know who will be going through some of these things. What will they be going through? We're going to be going through kind of some of the basics, getting our arms around Application Studio. We're going to talk about rebuilding customizations in Kinetic, the use of controls as part of that, debugging forms in Kinetic, and how embedded customization code now will be handled by functions. We're going to flip over to dashboards, talk about rebuilding dashboards, converting dashboards, some of the pluses and minuses, and some of the unique challenges that come up when you're trying to transition a dashboard to Kinetic. And then we'll jump into special topics and open questions. So looking forward to talking through all of that with everyone. Let's quickly, I'm going to try to go through this and get to the smart guys here as quickly as possible. But I think it'd be helpful just to talk about some of the terms, because we hear sometimes the term upgrade versus uplift. And I want to talk about this because we're really using the term uplift in terms of what we're talking about right now. And an upgrade in this context would really be moving to a more current version of the Epicor Kinetic ERP. So if you're migrating from 10.2.700 to one version of E11, 2025.1, let's say, that we would consider an upgrade. And in the current world, at least until we're in 2026.1, you can do that without having to change your UI screens. You can stay with your classic screens. And Uplift really has to do with the migrating of those classic screens to the Kinetic UI, to that more browser-based, web-based Kinetic UI. I think one of the key takeaways here, and I had a customer just the other day asking me, well, should I uplift in my current version of 10.2, or should I upgrade and then uplift? And do I have to do it all at once? And I know a lot of customers are kind of concerned about the idea of bundling an upgrade and an uplift at the same time. The key takeaway here is you can divide that risk up. You can get upgraded to one of the latest and greatest versions and then start the work to uplift. I would say, in talking with Joe and Matt, that that's probably the preferred version versus trying to uplift first, just because the tool sets have been evolving with each passing version, such that you really are best served to get on the latest current version and use their updated toolkit to get yourself current from an uplift standpoint. One other bit of terms that's probably worth talking about is the idea of the web UI versus cloud deployment. And I've heard customers in the past say, well, if I want to go to the web UI, I have to be in cloud, right? And you think web, so you think cloud, you think those two are the same. The truth is, these are very different concepts. The web UI, really, we're talking about the client side application, what lives on the end user's computer. And in this version, that idea of the browser-based, web-based Kinetic UI replaces that classic screen from a client side. Whereas the cloud, you're really talking about the server. It's much more of a deployment consideration. So that deployment can be on-prem, it can be in the vendor's cloud environment, it can be in a private cloud environment. The Kinetic Web UI can be leveraged in any of those options. So we have our little diagrams here, right? If you're in the SaaS cloud, it's more, the back-end instantiation is a bit of a black box. If you're on-prem, you're talking about everything's kind of within that network perimeter. And then in private cloud, you have your own network where your clients live, and then you have the private cloud where the servers live. And in any of those cases, the web UI is a viable option to you. So having gotten through some of those terms, let's get on with it already. And by the way, did you know that Spider-Man was an earlier adopter of the web UI? It's the worst joke, and it gets lots of rolled eyes, but that's about the point here where I hand it off to my team. Let me introduce them to you first. So Joe Trent has been with the Estes Group for more than 8 years now, has worked in the areas of configurator and custom solutions for pretty much that entire time. Great with data conversion, great with both old and new customizations, has come along the way to learn how to replace custom solutions with functions, and has been doing a lot of work for us for some very large customers over the years, and has been a huge boon to us. Now, Matt, he's relatively new. He was an ex-customer of ours, and he called me up one day and said, hey, this is a crazy business. How would I join you in it? I said, let's do this. So Matt works with us similarly in custom solutions realms. He does integrations, API. He works on our AI team and has been working to help us get a grip on just what this web UI situation looks like. And with that, how about I turn myself off, Matt, and I hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Brad. So let me get my video cut over here. See if this gets us there. Oh, forgive me, my video has stopped on me. Nope, I don't want that one. There we go. Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone here joining us today. What I'm going to talk about is what are the first steps. So with any major project, just like a Kinetic migration uplift project, the biggest question is, how do I start? That's the first hurdle to overcome to get to the point where you can really get into it and understand it. And that tiny step alone can introduce challenges and hurdles that we need to overcome just to get to the point where we can see what do our classic customizations now look like in Kinetic. And that's what I'm going to go over today. So we're going to look at a very basic classic customization, how we can do some tricks to identify what it is that's custom about it, migrate that code over through Epicor's native conversion process, take a look at what that kinetic screen is going to look and feel like and what that conversion process did, as well as some pitfalls that we can run into and some ways around it. So without further ado, what we're looking at here is a very basic customization wrapped around the classic ABC code entry. Now in here, for the sake of demo purposes, a lot of this isn't functional. It's just to represent, hey, we've added a control to this. What happens to that control when we migrate it over? And so what we're looking at is we have a box or a group down below with a button in it. Again, we're not tied to anything because we're more interested in seeing how that UI layout is going to migrate. We have a text label or a text field with a label that's tied to it. That's an important part that we'll see in the kinetic conversion. A checkbox, which is bound to an existing field, so it's just a representation of the calculated percent binding. So that binding we'll see come over. We've added a combo box that is being populated by a business object. So this is just pulling the unit and measure classes. We'll see how that converts over. And then lastly, we have a brand new tab added to this screen with a button on top and just an empty grid view. We're not populating this grid with anything for the sake of the demo, but this could very well be tied to a BAQ or some other way of loading this data. So the first things first is this customization is pretty lightweight. I can visually identify everything that I've customized. It isn't overly complicated, but that's not every case. So if you're in a lot of times quote entry, order entry, customizations can be enormous. It can be very difficult to just visually compare the base form to your customized form. It can be even harder if controls are hidden based off of the state of the transaction. And so what do we have in way of helping us identify those pieces? Well, that's where the community, the Epicor community at large, is a very valuable resource. And so I'll throw out a plug here to the epiusers.help forum. They're a huge help. One of the key folks there, I'm sure you've heard his name, Jose Gomez, him and his team have developed some code snippets that we can leverage to help identify visually what these changes are. And so if I go into the customization mode for this form, and then in my script editor, below here is where I've taken the code snippet from epiusers and put it into my script. Not going to go into great detail about this. I'll shoot the link out to the epiusers forum with this code in the chat here afterwards. But in effect, what this is doing is it's going and finding all of the custom controls, and if they're hidden, it will help bring them visibility by turning them visible, even pointing an arrow at them to say, hey, this is hidden. If they're not hidden, it's going to highlight them a different color, so very easily distinguishable from everything else. And so once you put that code snippet in, we're going to activate that on initialize and then see what that's going to offer us. So we'll save that form and then relaunch ABC code. This is my classic test customization that we're looking at. And right away, fantastic difference. I can see, hey, this section here has been modified. I've added this combo box that's getting highlighted. I have a group down here. On my tab, my button is highlighted. It's not catching everything, which is fine, but this is leaps and bounds further than where I was at the beginning, especially if this form was sales order entry or quote entry and had a lot more customizations wrapped around it. So this is what we're going to convert. This is our classic form that we're converting over. So what does that process look like? Well, if I cut over here to the Kinetic UI, all of your classic forms get converted to Kinetic via a conversion process in Epicor's conversion workbench. So uh, the conversion workbench is an entire list of all of these conversions that Epicor will process during an upgrade. So it is a high likelihood that if your sysadmins are standing up a separate environment, as it brand new or even upgrading a copy of your current environment, this process is required to run. And in particular, the process 180, which is our create kinetic customizations, is also by default set to auto run. So this process will run automatically. That said, you can still run it standalone. So if you are making tweaks in one environment in the classic form and want to migrate just that one over, you install it through a cab file just like you normally would, and then you can rerun this process for it to pick up that new layer, that modified layer, and redo the conversion. So to run this in a standalone mode, you drill into it, and then there's no filters that you can add per se, but you would just submit this process, and it's just going to go pick up the changes to look at to go to run the conversion against. You do get to see the activity of what it went through. So if it just skipped one or it did run into an error or a warning, that's a good indicator that something went wrong and we need to go drill into it further. Um, so this is a very valuable log here to keep an eye on after the process has run. Once that process has ran, we now have a kinetic layer that we can look at. So if we go back to our home page, we can view that layer in two ways. The way that we'll look at here is directly through Application Studio. Application Studio, I like to think of it as the replacement of customization maintenance, where you can see all of the custom layers or forms that you had built and be able to drill down into those. Now, you do need to be flagged as a developer for you to be able to activate these. So underneath user account security maintenance, make sure you're flagged as a developer to get into this. It actually looks like through my testing, I am not. So let me quickly log out and back in. Bear with me 1 second. Demos are never perfect. There's always a hiccup.
Well, that means we get to stare at your office and try to discern what your book titles are behind you.
Oh, there's some interesting ones back there. All right, we're back. Uh, so to drill into the application studio or the application editor of our layer, we can see here that the conversion process kicked out a classic test kinetic layer. So we can click into that, and now we're in the application studio editor. This can be a very daunting tool, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the basics or the fundamentals of it are the same as that you would see within the classic customization. We have the ability to look at row rules, some business layer functionality, but a whole lot of new functionality that I really appreciate because some of these things were very difficult to get out in Classic. So first thing that we're looking at here is the application map. You can think about this as it's identifying each page of a application. Another way to think about it is when Kinetic UI was first created, the idea of tabs didn't exist. Everything was a card in a stacked card. They've since been adding tabbed functionality, but the conversion process still will treat tabs within Classic as new pages within Kinetic as opposed to leveraging that tab functionality that they've created. And that's what we're seeing here is this custom page. If I click this and edit into it, is actually our tab that we created. in Classic. A couple other things of note is as you click on each one of these, and this goes the same for clicking on a control, you get your properties page off to the right, very similar to Classic, but with a lot more features and functionalities you can manipulate within here. Off to the left, we have our layouts. So you can create multiple different layouts of the same screen that you can publish in tie to other menus. Data rules, these are the row rules that you could build in Classic. Um, Very similar functionality. You're assigning it a table or a data view to hook against, assign its conditions and whatever actions it's going to take. A key thing to know about these data rules is they will fire in alphabetical order. Whereas in Classic, you could get away with adjusting where in the code these are set if conditions are dependent on each other. You don't get that per se in Kinetic. It is alphabetical. So something to keep aware of. We also have events. So this is Epicor's way of giving us some business logic capability within the UI, or sorry, within the Kinetic layer, uh, where if we look at on form load, we can see all of these events that it's firing. Events have their own toolbox of different components and things that we can add to it, as well as what is this hooked to. So in this case, on form load, if we go into properties, we're hooked to a window type on load. And so that's what triggers this event to process. So a lot of cool functionality there. And then we have data views. So data views are the same type of architecture that you would see in Classic. They're the tables that back everything within the UI, but they've introduced this trans view table. Now, Joe's going to talk a little bit more about how to leverage this in a use case for dashboards because it's all the same in a dashboard as it is in a customization. Uh, I like to think about this as it's a table that I can use to store data, to put triggers on for anything, any custom logic I want to add to this form. So if I wanted a filter field to be put in here that other grids will leverage, you can do that. You can put events on it. It's a nice standalone free form table that you can use to your advantage. The last one here is history. Kinetic has introduced versioning within it, which is fantastic. I know that's a huge challenge to do that in an effective way in Classic. Uh, to get something to be stored in history, you have to commit the layer. So that's this cloud with an arrow icon in the upper right. So once you're done modifying your layer, if you commit it, that records it in your version history. And then you can go back and revert to an old version if you'd like, or even merge versions together. So that's a huge advantage over what we had in Classic. So that's as far as I'm going to go with the overview here. I want to dig into what does this form look like now that we converted it over to Kinetic. To do that, I'm going to preview this with the preview icon, which is our little play button in the upper right. And immediately I'm presented with an error. So now it's, oh crap, how do I move forward with this? How do I see what's happening? If I were in Classic, I'd be turning on the trace log and trying to see what was happening there. How do we do that now in the Kinetic space? Well, the trace log is going to be leveraging the browser's developer tools, and you can access that by hitting F12 in your browser. Now there's two tabs in here that are the most useful for Kinetic. One is the network tab and the other is the console tab. The network tab, because Kinetic is a web-based application now, even if you're running it in a full client, it's still a web page embedded into a WinForm. So everything is touching the application server through the API, which means we can go see the API calls that are being sent to the server. Say if it's an execute BAQ, we can see what the BAQ is, all the parameters that got put against it, and the return data set. So that's very useful compared to what we had to Kinetic or to Classic. But then we have console. Console is where we're going to see the trace log itself. Now I can type events into here. to do some additional functionality, which we'll get into. But looking at this right away, not really useful information, just like this. So how can we make this more useful? Well, we have to get ourselves into debug mode to actually see Epicor's trace logging. You can do that a couple different ways. If you click on the screen and type Control Alt 8, that will toggle on your debug mode. You'll see it in the console that it's turned on. In my case, that hotkey isn't working for whatever reason, so I have to come up with a different way to turn that on. Another way is if you're in a form, you can activate it by going to the three-dot overflow menu in the upper right and turning on the debug tool. That also activates it. But how can I do that uh, when I don't have either of those options? Well, I'm going to clear my console and then start typing EP, and then we see EP debug, this object show up for us. This is Epicor's debugging object. It has a lot of functionalities that we can take advantage of, including if I do dot toggle meta FX logging and I hit enter, that gets me into debug mode. And so once I'm in debug mode, we can see, all of the Epicor logging. But I still have a problem, which is I can't get into debug mode until after the error already occurred. So how can I turn this on so that I can see what was actually happening? That's where events become really helpful. So back into the form, I'm going to create a new event. I'm going to toggle this to trigger off of an event. I'm going to fire before, and I'm going to fire it before form on load. And then in my toolbox, we have a console write widget, which will actually write something to the console, which means I can now type in a value here with a little syntax sugar wrapped around it. That same command to be put into the console before the form onload event. So now if I save that and then re-preview this, now this is looking a whole lot different because I can see right away my debug got toggled on, and now I can actually see all of the events that fired during that loading process up until this error. So this is what the new event log looks like. So we can see what action is it taking? Is it taking? What event is firing? Rules or conditions or anything that's happening within that event get exposed here. You can see what's happening in your data views, which is really great. But if I scroll down here, I can see what caused this error. This error was caused by the event custom code color change. Well, that color change sounds familiar. That was the method that we put into the script in the classic screen. So let's dig into that and figure out what's going on. So back into the application studio, if I open up my events and search for color, here's the event that Epicor created as part of the conversion that accounted for that custom script that I added. Now, Kinetic is a low-code, no-code framework. So why am I seeing an execute C# widget in here? That's a fantastic question. Because if I go and launch this, it looks like I have a C# code editor within my events. The unfortunate part is this is just being used as part of the conversion process to store the code. It's not actually functional. All of these objects and things that we put into here that are controlling that infragistics library, that UI library from Classic, don't exist within Kinetic, nor does this widget itself even fully function. Checking syntax, you get no result. There seems to be, IntelliSense that doesn't load. For all intents and purposes, this is a placeholder as a reference for you to at least see what code got moved over. So much so that this widget doesn't exist in the toolbox. So you can't manually put this in here to try to execute some level of code. Now, in this case, I know that this code was just a debugging technique from Classic, so I don't need it. So I can just disable this event, save that, and now if I re-preview it, it now removes that issue, and I've pushed past that problem to the point where I can now interact with the screen, which is where we wanted to be. So that gets us past that event. So now I can drill down into our layer and actually start taking a look at what did the conversion do to our classic customization. So we added that combo box. We can see that combo box is now here. Interesting about thing about Kinetic is if a control isn't bound to something, it will by default be read only, whereas in Classic by default it was editable. So that's why this field is read only. Um, we can also see that our group box down here sort of converted how we would have thought it would. It didn't create a whole card, which is what this drop down is called. Instead, it created a new bounding control as the group box that these elements are in, which we can see a little more in the actual application map itself if we go into the edit mode here. It added this little bounding control around it. We can also see that we have our checkbox, we have our button, we have our label. Now our text field and label were two separate things in Classic. Epicor has combined those because I had them tied to each other within Classic. So it just treated that label as a property of this text field. And like we talked about before, our custom tab ended up showing as a new page. So we can see under related pages, our custom tab and where our grid got put versus our button. You likely have noticed that the order that the UI put these in place is different. So we had a button above the grid before, now it's flipped. Even back in the details tab, these were horizontally and in a different order. Epicor has made some decisions there, so you're going to have to go in and tweak where the UI is put the controls and make sure that things are bound to the right, have the right epi bindings and whatnot. So unlikely that a customization converts over to Kinetic and it's just perfect and you don't have to touch it. There's most likely a need to go tweak and modify what you're doing here. Now, once we're in here and we want to start kind of debugging even further, let's say we got to figure out why this combo box isn't doing anything or our buttons aren't doing anything. What does the data look like? There's some other advanced debugging techniques that you can use within that EP debug object that we were looking at before. So if I clear my console again and uh, type in EP debug and help, this is going to tell you what all of the hotkeys are that Epicor has created for you to use. So the Control Alt 8, to toggle on debugging. We could do Control Alt V, which dumps all of our data view objects. That's what we're going to look at here in a second. But then it provides all of these other tools that may or may not be tied to hotkeys and definitions of what those tools are. So this is really good to familiarize yourself with and understand what tools you have in your toolbox from a development standpoint. The ones that I use on a regular basis would be uh, the views. In here, this will drop all of the data views that are backing this form, what data is in those views. That's a huge advantage over Classic because some of these data views that are not bound to a grid or anything in the UI. You're usually running a BAQ to figure out what it is if it's a data table, but when it's a data view, that becomes challenging. This solves that problem by giving us this information. Another tool that I use on a consistent basis is EP debug and all rules tree. So this is going to drop the state of all of your row rules that you've added to this. So again, something really useful if you have a complicated set of row rules that are dependent on each other or multiple are tied to the same field and that order of operations like I talked about matters and now they may be firing in alphabetical order and it's breaking something. Well, you can see how things got fired and what the results were with this. So highly recommend kind of going into the EP debug help section and familiarizing yourself with those options because there's a lot of really good resources available to help debug within here. So now at this point, I want to kind of stop here with the demo because uh, I really wanted to get us to the point where we've taken that first step and have gone through a classic to a kinetic and gotten to the point where we can now interact with the screen and some of those pitfalls and tricks that we can leverage to get us to this point. And just want to briefly talk about how do we implement this? What are things to think about when we're planning out this giant kinetic migration? What I always recommend and think about is the complexity of your customizations matters a ton in this case. If you have a very simple customization, sort of like what we were working off with here, then doing a conversion and just tweaking what Epicor has created for you may be the path of least resistance and the most viable option. If you have a much larger customization with hundreds or even thousands of lines of code backing that classic form inside the script, this process can become a nightmare very, very quick. Whether it's chasing down bugs like we went through, or even figuring out what all of that code is even used anymore, or is it just legacy code? So that that decision point is now it may make more sense to just start from scratch and really rethink how we're interacting with the form, what that business logic or business functionality is, and if it just makes more sense to strip things down or rebuild from scratch or a combination of both. So with that, I'll stop here and hand it off to Joe to talk a little bit about dashboards.
All righty. We're going to continue with their process through a walkthrough of a conversion from a dashboard, classic dashboard, to a kinetic dashboard. And we're going to go pretty fast because of time limitations. But don't worry, because we are going to share a document that all this demo is based on. And it's got lots of example screenshots that detail all of this stuff we're going to go through. But don't worry about not catching it all the first time or in the video, because we're going to give you some extra stuff to look at. All right. You should see on your screen. Are you seeing on your screen?
Yeah, I can see it, Joe.
Okay. Here's an example of a fairly typical classic version of a dashboard. We've got, a bunch of queries, some tracker views, some charts, multiple grids, that kind of thing. Here we have a tracker, and we're going to pay attention to this tracker in a minute. But and I'll just show you an example of creating a dashboard from the deploy dashboard menu. Of course, most of us will recognize this, where we generate a preview or the whole application on a classic dashboard. And this this application here is a kinetic version of that. Let's just go ahead and look at a preview. And when we load this, notice that it's going to try to fire that tracker in a slide out panel. And now that looks well enough, but we've had just lots of issues with these. For one thing, you'll notice there's no OK button. So how do you even do it? And the ones I've gotten to work, the filtering, the binding on it didn't work. And further, if you've got a dashboard with multiple trackers on it, it only fires this tracker on the form open. And when you close it, you can never get back there. And you can't get to the other trackers on the dashboard. So we found it's easier just to create a copy of our classic dashboard, delete all the trackers off of it, and then we'll recreate those in Kinetic, which is, it's not a big deal to do. So otherwise, you'll see that it has created a dashboard in the same format. We've got our tabs here. We got our this is a grid that's subscribed to this grid. Pretty much the same as the classic version. We'll just run it wide open with no trackers here. All right, we'll put that away. And that's what we've done. We've copied this dashboard, went and deleted these trackers, and then done built the assembly from this deploy menu and created a tracker in or a dashboard in Kinetic. And what you see here is a finished group. We've added a good bit of stuff to this, but all these changes are done in Application Studio. Matt showed you. And the easiest way, once you've got the dashboard on the menu and run it from the menu, the easiest way to get into that is just go to the overflow menu there and go into Application Studio, and that will pop our customization layer up. Notice here we've got just the one page that is generated for us. We'll take a look at that. The original dashboard converted from Classic contains just this section right here, and this is a group of grids just bound together in a tab format. There are secondary down here, but this will look a little odd because this is kind of a new thing we can do in Kinetic, that we have put some filters up here that can apply to multiple grids down here. In this case, we are filtering by either a team leader oversees a group of resource groups, or we can look and filter by a single resource group. And when we change one of these two combo boxes here, it puts the result into this text box, which is what we use to then filter these different grids here. The trans view data view that the Matt showed you earlier is where we store all of these things. So we've got all these filters and various things where we can park the data out there for use. Since we don't have a C# script where we can just create a variable and put a value in it, we have this area to go park that data. And so we can see this filter control here. The epi binding is to that trans view data view and that column. All righty. You notice this tab format, it works a little differently than Classic, where you just had to drag the grid and put it in place. We have this control here called a panel card grid. There are different kinds of panel cards. This is just a standard panel card that allows us to put buttons and various things on. And we have panel card grids that contain, some filtering capability and the grid. And then to group those together, we have this panel card stack. If we look under this panels, we'll see those panels that are on the form that we say we want to include those in this stack, and then we can, just rearrange those as we want. So filtering, we've got our upper level filter that can apply to any of those grids, and then we've got one here that we said is going to apply only to this grid. So we're going to filter by the payroll date in this case. So if I click on this grid and go to the data, what's that grid bound to? Well, we look in the epi binding, it's empty. But if we look to the grid model, open that up, this will show us all the grid information and the options on the actual control itself, the grid itself, and we'll go all the way down here, we'll find where the data comes from in the provider model. Provider model binds that grid to the data view that comes from the classic dashboard. And that data view is filled with data from this BAQ. Same idea as on the classic version, but it looks a lot different here. And we want to do this filtering we've been talking about. So under BAQ options, we have the standard SQL where clause or this where list, which gives us a list of filters we can enter in. So here we've got, off of our data view, we've got the payroll date. It's greater than equal. Guess that here's where that trans view pops back up again. We've got the data coming from the data view that this control is connected to. So that's where that filtering comes from. And the resource group coming out of that data view is in a list that's in that resource group filter, again, hooked on the trans view data view. Again, we're going through this really quickly. Don't worry about picking all this up this round. It'll all be in the document, and we'll more eloquently than I can put it here in this limited time. All right, so that's a quick run through on the grids, the data binding, the filtering. Like Matt showed you, that in event-oriented programming, we're used to that from the C# days, but the events just are going to look differently than the events we're used to looking at in C#. And I'd like to show you something here that will follow me through. One note: when you create a new event, it calls it new event or new event 1, 2, 3. If you don't rename that thing before you make any changes and save it, you're stuck with that name. So if you want it to have a meaningful name, do that first. In this case, the form load that Matt showed you in his demo, this event is going to run after that. So it'll just run once when the form opens and loads, and we can do stuff here. In this case, we're just setting up some data. And this row update is a control we can put on here, and that just sets a value in the current row of whatever data view we're connected to. So you can see we are setting a value again on TransView, and here we're setting a hidden property productivity is what that column is called. What's the deal with that? And what's all this code down here? We've been talking about no code. Excuse me. We're in a low code environment where we can use snippets of code in various places like this. And this is just a piece of JavaScript code that we'll look at here. That's what it looks like, where we can see the whole thing. Won't spend a lot of time here, but this is basically looking at the panel card that's got all our main grids, upper level grids, and it's looking to see if our productivity grid has an offset width of greater than 0, which means it's active. And when it does, it sets our hidden property, and then the value changes and it's an event. We can do something with it. So I'll show you what we did with it. When we're on the shop load report, we have this grid that, let's just populate that. We have this grid that's got data in it, and then operations here may or may not have materials attached to it. So that's great to see if we're on the shop load report grid, but doesn't make much sense to us to show it if we're on a different one. So when this is active, we can show it. When it's not active, we can hide it. And the productivity, we can show a chart and hide that when we go to a different grid. And the way we do that is excuse me, this set of code sets up an observer or watcher that looks for this grid changing. And when this grid is active, it goes and fires an event that sets the hidden property of this control to false, which means it then shows it. And here's where it does that. We have all these same events in Classic, but they're these widgets and things instead of C# code. So that when our hidden property changes, this is on column changed in the transview, data view, and that hidden property, when it changes to true, which means we want to hide the control, then we go to our parameters, go to properties, and we set the hidden property to true. If we have displayed that grid and it sets that property to false, the hidden property to false, then we want to set that to false, which then shows the control. Pretty cool. We're running short on time. I want to show you just one thing. We're looking at charts here. When we converted this dashboard, the charts did not come over. The conversion didn't know what to do with them, so it didn't do anything. And the charts work a little differently in Kinetic, in that you need to connect them via the EDD, the Epicor Data Discovery module. So we won't cover that here, but you go in and create a view with that data and filters and that kind of thing. And we can come back in here and set up a panel card. And in the panel card, we put this chart and widget. That comes from the toolbox over in widgets. There's a data discovery chart. And we can set the height, and we can go find the view, set the view up. Then we can go do the publish and subscribe and set the filter up to a call context BPM data character 02 is what that one is. And again, this is all in the document. You can go look up. You don't have to remember this, but just know that it's there and available and pretty cool stuff. One last little tidbit, this won't take long to do, is on this productivity, see that candy cane? Say, what the heck is that dang deal? That is an action item that we can set up. I'll click on the right thing. There we go. This overflow menu, or what Epicor's terminology, action menu, can be set up in action data. And I can set a new menu up in the action data, or I can move it onto the primary toolbar here. Give it an ID and give it an icon that we get from a website that's got a million different icons on it. Maybe not a million. And that's all in documentation. But here I've selected candy cane just because it caught my eye. And now I have bound this button to a transview item candy cane. And when I get a click on that, I can go over here to an epi binding event, and on a button click on that target transview.candy cane, it runs this event. And so I can do anything in here I want to, call it an Epicor function or other components, do whatever it is we want to do. In this case, it's just a dialog show box, so that when we click on this, it does something. And that's just cool. All right, that's mostly the demo. Again, we'll have all this in a document. Really quick, I just wanted to run you through so you can get an idea of what the flow is through here and some of the things that are available. I appreciate your attention and appreciate you coming along with us. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you for that, Joe. All right, folks. Well, this brings us to the end of our webinar. So while we're here, let's go ahead and let's talk about questions. Do we have any? By all means, reach out right now and send any of your questions to us, and we will talk through those. Guys, while I'm talking to you, let's ask kind of the first thing. In terms of all of the different kinds of events, all the little within transaction events, before, after adapters, are there adequate hooks inside of App Studio to give you everything you need in that front to be able to convert that to the end? I think one of the best things about Kinetic in the past was its ability to hang on to all of those little movements along the way. Is there a good analog for each of those? Matt, and you guys are both muted, so you're going to need to give me your best. You're going to have to really shout.
To go back and learn my sign language a little better. For the most part, unless you're doing things that are pretty advanced like Joe was showing, where we're trying to put an event around like a tab change, the Epicor or the native event hooks are pretty well robust. Joe, I'll let you weigh in on here too, but to me it seems like unless you're trying to do something that's pretty unique where you have to go into JavaScript land, Epicor has those things covered.
Yeah, one good thing on the events, you've seen some events in the demos, but if you go into a big application like customer or part or any of those things, you'll go into the events section and there'll be lots and lots of events in there that in the old classic customization, you didn't have really very good visibility to what those were. You could set up code to capture some of those events, but like a get by ID or whatever. But you can go in and look at all those events in the list. Pardon me, the things that's doing. So you can key things, say after this thing runs, do this other thing. So it's a pretty robust situation.
Excellent. Now, I've seen plenty of cases in embedded customizations where a grid gets populated from the output of a BAQ. Have you guys found that? And is that a solvable problem?
Yeah, there's actually several ways that you can do it. The simplest way is what we saw Joe outline in the dashboard, where in the grid models data provider, you can assign a BAQ ID and any filters around that to load that data. But you can also trigger an event to go call the BAQ via REST and take its response data and load it directly into a data view that you could have one grid or multiple grids tied to. You're just loading the data view directly as opposed to having it be tied to the grid control. And it doesn't have to be just a BAQ either. You can do that same idea with a function. Go trigger a function, take its response data, and load it into a data view that a grid is bound to.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh, very good. Well, folks, I don't see any questions coming up right now that we haven't already addressed. So by all means, we will be putting this out on our YouTube stream here within the next couple of days. So you're more than welcome to check that out. For any of our attendees, we'll be sending you a link to that coming up. And as it notes here on this final slide, by all means, reach out to us and ask for a 1-hour complimentary session with our propeller heads, and we'll talk through some of these challenges in a little more detail, get a little more granular, and help give you a push in the right direction to moving your product forward. You can reach out to our email at sales@estasgroup.com, or you can reach out to me directly. My email's right up there. So this has been a great session. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Matt, for everything. And thank you to our attendees for being a part of this. And by all means, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you again, guys.
Thanks, folks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.